Starting off in our post controller, where we left off last lesson, we're actually going to go a step further and clean up our post controller's database queries. So first, you see this backslash right here. That means that the database class, this DB, is at the root namespace. So just like you could reference /app, /http, /controllers, and then /post controller, and get the controller we're currently in based on this namespace, and then the class name, just like that. Well, DB is actually right where app is at. So you just use backslash. It's at the root. So what we can actually do is, instead of using this backslash, we can go up here and we can say use DB. And we'll completely remove that right there. Now next, what we want to do is we want to return the actual post within our show function that correlates to the ID passed in from the parameter. To do this, we're just going to say DB table posts, and then we're going to say where ID is ID. After that, we're going to simply say get. So we're just going to get the ID, get all the posts where the ID is ID. Up here, we're saying get all of the posts. So now if we go back to our browser and we hit our /posts endpoint, we get all of our posts still. But if we hit the post with an ID of 2, we'll just get the post with an ID of 2. If we hit the post with an ID of 3, we get the post with an ID of 3. If we hit a post that does not exist, an ID that does not exist, well, just an empty array. Now, we are using the database query builder. Via DB, we're getting the posts table, and then we're running queries. What if I told you there was a cleaner way to do this? Given this is pretty clean, what if I told you there was actually a cleaner way to do this? And here's how. We're going to use Eloquent, Laravel's Eloquent Query Builder. It is pretty much a child class of this database query builder, but it's much more readable. And yes, I know this looks pretty readable, but we're about to use Laravel Eloquent, which is even more readable. So here's how you do it. First, open up our terminal. Next, we want to run PHP artisan, and we want to go back to our make commands. Within our make commands, we want to find model, make model. This is going to create a new Eloquent model class. This is what we want. Now, before we actually run the command, what are we trying to model? What are we trying to get or show or create or store or edit or update or anything else? Well, posts, right? So we want to actually say PHP artisan make model, but instead of plural and snake case, we want to use singular and studly case. Make model post. It automatically generates this post model for us within the app directory. It models a post. So what's cool about Eloquent Models is by default, this post model is going to look for the posts table, right? So this is actually something we can define. We can say, hey, we need the table to be posts, but by default, it knows that whatever this is, whatever the name of this model class is, it needs to look for the lowercase or snake case plural version of this class name. So we can actually remove this all together, we don't need to reference the table that the Eloquent model is representing or able to access. It just knows. So now, within our post controller, we can actually say use app/post. And now, instead of using db table post, well, check this out. You can do post get, completely remove that, and then instead of this fancy guy down here, we can do post find ID. And because our model name is post, it is automatically looking in our posts table. So let's try it in the browser and confirm that everything is still working. And it does. Of course, if we hit the show, whoop, need to add that backslash. There we go. And then we hit the post with an ID of 3. And then what happens if we hit a post that doesn't exist? Nothing. As it should be. So we can now get all posts, and we can now get a specific post based on the ID. Now I want to just show a quick example of what's really going on here. As far as how the post model, knows to get the data from the posts table. So first, if we go to post, let's say we changed this and we said, hey, we want to actually explicitly define the table. And we just said, we called it posts table instead of just posts. I don't know, something like that. But this table doesn't actually exist, right? So what happens when we go back and reload the page? SQL state, base table or view not found, Laravel 7 posts table. It's not found. So you can explicitly define the table right here. But by default, if you don't explicitly define the table, it's just going to take the plural snake case of the class name and use that as the table it searches for. So in this case, the model name is post, and the snake case plural of post is our posts table. So if we explicitly define that this is our table, and we go and we reload that page, it'll work again. And it will continue to work as long as the class name is post and our table name is the snake case of the plural of that class name, which is post. So that's what's going on. That's how it knows to go through the posts table. It's just a little magic going on behind the scenes. If you need to explicitly define exactly what the table name is, again, you can use protected table, and you can say whatever table, random table, and as long as it exists, that's the table this model will try to use. If nothing is defined, it will just take the plural snake case of the class name. And so that, of course, equals posts, and it does that by default. One more thing I want to point out, when we go back to the post controller, these methods that are statically accessible on our post model actually mimic the database query builder methods. The model is a subset of the database query builder. So originally we did db where ID is ID, and then we did get. Well, we could also do post where ID is ID, and then we could do get. Just like that. And now if we reload our page, because we're getting an array every time, if we look for a post by an ID that does not exist, we'll still get an empty array. Because we're getting all where the ID is ID, but it didn't find any, so it's going to default to an empty array. Whereas if we do find ID, it's not getting an array, it's getting a specific post. So then if it doesn't find a post with that ID, nothing shows. Yeah. Yeah, guys. We've all been there. I'm sure there are a lot of you that are sitting there like, just starting to get frustrated and feeling like there's missing pieces everywhere. Look, I really want to emphasize at this point in the series that we're covering a major part of the Laravel world. And the first part was views. What can the user see? How do we represent data? The second major pillar was controllers. When the route enters, how do we control the action? What do we do with the data? And the third is models, specifically Eloquent models. And we just showed how to use Eloquent models to query the database. In the next lesson, we're going to go over the fourth pillar, which is migrations, database migrations, which allow us to define the structure of our database tables within the Laravel framework, within our PHP, and then use Artisan to migrate our structure or the structure of our database. Now, these four pillars, we're covering the very basics right now, the very basics, and then throughout the series, we're going to circle back around and we're going to cover each of these four pillars on a much more in-depth level. This first time around, I want to emphasize we're just getting the very, very, very basics going. And so if you're not seeing too much of the bigger picture yet, that's okay. That's okay. As long as you stick with it and you just keep trying. And if you need to rewatch a lesson, then obviously that's more than all right. But I just want to really emphasize that there is a lot of content that we're not covering yet, because I think having a basic understanding of the major pillars that make up the Laravel framework, and then going back and then learning each individually more in depth, will be a lot more valuable to the end goal of getting a deeper understanding of Laravel 7 from the ground up. And so, don't feel intimidated. If you don't feel like that hacker guy, don't worry. None of us do. But I'm hoping that you guys can just stick it out and just keep on tugging away. And I get that sometimes software and learning and coding can be frustrating. But it's not supposed to be easy. We can make it simple, and it's simple because it's try, fail, repeat. Try, fail, repeat. So just keep on doing that, guys, and I promise you guys, if you keep on just keeping on and just trying and failing and repeating and trying and failing and repeating and rewatching some lessons where you need to, but ultimately just tugging away at it, you'll eventually get it. It starts to click, and it's a really almost inspiring feeling knowing that you were able to overcome all these things that can seem like walls or barriers right now. So anyways, I just wanted to give that piece of unsolicited advice, and I hope to see you guys in the next lesson. We are going to be covering the fourth pillar, and that is going to be Laravel migrations.